We often think of history as a series of loud bangs, the clash of steel, the collapse of walls, the roar of a conqueror. My last video was exactly that. We spoke of al-Rahman I, the Falcon of Quraysh, a man who survived a bloodbath in Damascus and carved a kingdom out of the dust of Iberia through sheer cold-blooded pragmatism. But what happens the day after the revolution? What happens when the falcon stops flying? Usually the sons of great conquerors fall into one of two traps. They either become spoiled tyrants, obsessed with the gold their fathers bled for, or they become weak shadows, unable to hold together the violent machinery of the state. In 788 AD, as Abd al-Rahman lay dying in Córdoba, the world expected the Umayyad dream to shatter. Instead, it met Hisham I. If his father was the sword that cleared the land, Hisham was the soul that made it sacred. Today we are going to talk about a man who complicates every Western stereotype of the Oriental despot. We are going to look at a ruler who saw through the mental poverty of luxury and reached back to the most dignified model of leadership known to man, the Prophetic Model of Medina. Hisham was not the eldest son. In the brutal world of 8th century politics, that usually meant he was destined for the sidelines or the grave. His brother Suleiman was the elder, the warrior, the one with the right to the throne. But Abd al-Rahman was a man who understood power better than most. He watched his sons. He saw Suleiman's arrogance. He saw the other brothers' hunger for the palace. There is a famous story that Abd al-Rahman sent for his sons. He looked at their eyes. In the eyes of the others, he saw the reflection of the throne. In the eyes of Hisham, he saw the reflection of a higher purpose. Hisham was a student. He spent his time with the fuqaha, jurists, and the ulema. While his brothers were out hunting with hawks, Hisham was hunting for the truth of how a ruler should answer to his creator. His father made a choice that changed Western history. He nominated Hisham. This brings us to a crucial point. Critics like Bamber Gascoigne often look at the pious ruler and see a man who is narrow. They see a man obsessed with ritual and call it a lack of imagination. But I ask you, what takes more imagination? To follow your animal instincts and live in a palace of gold, or to imagine a society built on the invisible foundations of justice and accountability? Hisham chose the latter. He didn't just want to rule Spain, he wanted to justify his rule to God. When Hisham took power, he didn't increase his security. He didn't build higher walls around the Alcazar. Instead, he did something that would have made the kings of Europe, and even some of his own ancestors in Damascus, shudder with confusion. He disappeared into the night. There are recorded accounts of Hisham I walking the streets of Córdoba in the middle of a storm. No guards, no silk robes. Just a man in a simple wool cloak, carrying food and money to the homes of the widows and the sick. He wasn't doing this for a photo op. There were no social media feeds in 790 AD. He did it because he believed in the concept of muraqabah, the constant awareness that Allah is watching the king even when the subjects are asleep. That is following the prophetic tradition. When the prophet, peace be upon him, was the undisputed leader of Arabia, he still mended his own shoes and milked his own goats. He lived the ultimate poor man's life while holding the keys to a peninsula. Hisham I, like Umar ibn Al-Khattab, was trying to recreate that dignity of the mat in the middle of a European superpower. This wasn't mental poverty, as the Orientalists claim. This was spiritual mastery. It takes a massive intellect to hold absolute power in one hand and a beggar's humility in the other. One of the most fascinating things Hisham did wasn't a war or a decree. It was a bridge. The great Roman bridge of Córdoba, crossing the Guadalquivir, was in ruins. A pragmatic king might have ignored it or built a private bridge for his army. Hisham viewed the bridge as a religious obligation. He spent astronomical sums from his personal wealth, not the state treasury, to rebuild it. Why? Because the Prophet Sawaz taught that removing an obstacle from a path is charity. To Hisham, building a bridge for the farmers and the travelers was as much an act of worship as praying in the mosque. When you walk that bridge today, you aren't just walking on Roman stone. You are walking on the physical manifestation of a king's piety. He believed that if a mule tripped on a broken stone on that bridge, he, the Emir, would be answerable for it on the Day of Judgment. This is the Umar ibn Al-Khattab mindset of responsibility that modern secular history simply cannot compute. We often hear about the Reconquista or the wars with Charlemagne, but the real clash of civilizations during Hisham's reign was internal. It was the clash between the imperial model and the prophetic model. The imperial model says, "The king is the state, the gold in the treasury is mine." The prophetic model says, "The king is a trustee, the gold belongs to the poor." Hisham leaned entirely into the second. He reached out to Imam Malik ibn Anas in Medina. Córdoba and Medina are thousands of miles apart, and communication took months. But Hisham was so committed to the idea of a Medinan society in Spain that he officially adopted the Maliki school of law. By doing this, Hisham wasn't just being pious, he was being a genius of social cohesion. He gave Al-Andalus a legal backbone that wasn't based on his personal whims. He made himself subject to the law. This is what modern historians miss. They see religious law as a restriction. But for the common man in Córdoba, it was a protection. If the king is subject to the law of God, then the king cannot seize your land or kill your son on a whim. Piety was the first form of constitutionalism in Europe. Don't mistake this humility for weakness. Hisham was a horse for the course. When the Christian kingdoms of the north tried to test the pious young emir, they found out very quickly that a man who fears God fears nothing else. Hisham led the armies personally. He was a brilliant strategist who understood that the defense of the borders was a religious duty, fard. He pushed the borders further north than his father ever did. But here is the Hisham difference. When the war was over and the booty was collected, he didn't keep his share. He took the fifth of the spoils and poured it into the great mosque of Córdoba. He finished the prayer hall. He built the first minaret. He turned the wealth of war into a monument of peace. When you look at the red and white arches today, you are looking at the recycled spoils of war, turned into a place where the king and the cobbler would pray side by side. There is an interesting side effect to Hisham's piety that people rarely talk about, the birth of Andalusi art. Because Hisham was so strictly against personal vanity, you won't find statues of him. You won't find portraits of Umayyad kings on the walls. Instead, he encouraged an art form that reflected the infinite, geometry. Under his patronage, the artists of Córdoba began to perfect the arabesque. If you look at the intricate patterns in the mosque, they never end. They represent the infinite nature of Allah. This is the dignity we've been talking about. A morally bankrupt ruler wants his face on a coin and his statue in the square. A pious ruler wants his presence to vanish so that only the Creator is visible. Hisham's Córdoba was a city where the architecture whispered Allah rather than shouting the name of the king. This brings me to a realization I had in Istanbul. I remember standing in the Topkapi Palace, simple, stone, rugged, and then walking into the Dolmabahce Palace with its 14 tons of gold on the ceiling. The guide said it best: as long as the Ottomans lived like the men of Topkapi, they ruled the world. The moment they tried to emulate the luxury of the West to prove they were civilized, they lost their soul. Hisham I was the Topkapi of Al-Andalus. He knew that the moment a Muslim ruler begins to measure his worth by his chandeliers, he has already lost. He understood that dignity is something you carry in your chest, not something you hang on your walls. This is the rebuttal to the Gascoignes of the world. They think that by rejecting luxury, Aurangzeb or Hisham were narrow. No, they were free. They were the only men in the room who didn't care about the gold, which meant they were the only men who couldn't be bought. Hisham only ruled for 8 years. He died at the young age of 39. In those 8 years, he did more to stabilize the heart of Islam in Europe than men who ruled for 40. He left behind a kingdom that was wealthy, secure, and legally grounded. But more importantly, he left behind a template for the pious ruler. When he was dying, he didn't ask for a pyramid. He didn't ask for a Taj Mahal. He wanted what every truly pious ruler wants: to meet his Lord with a clean record and a simple shroud. If we look at the history of the world, we see a recurring pattern. Whether it's Cyrus the Great in his simple stone tomb, Marcus Aurelius in his war tent, or Hisham I in the streets of Córdoba, the greats are always the ones who knew that the crown was a test, not a toy. The challenge. So I leave you with this. We live in an age of Dolmabahce. We are told that our value is based on what we own, what we show, and how much grandeur we can project on a screen. But the epic tale of Hisham I tells us something different. It tells us that the most powerful thing you can do is to be absolute in authority, yet infinite in humility. Was Hisham a great historian's favorite? Maybe not. Was he a bankrupt Islamophobe's idea of a king? Definitely not. But was he a man of dignity? The arches of Córdoba still stand. The Maliki law he brought still guides millions, and the stories of his night walk still inspire us 200 years later. If that isn't greatness, I don't know what is. Next step. In our next episode, we look at the fitna, the civil war that nearly destroyed everything Hisham built. How does a pious legacy survive a world of pragmatic violence? Subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you in the next one.